Everyone, my name is Jarvis, and I just want to examine how gender and nature is viewed through redefining that nature-culture dichotomy that Sherry Ortner discusses in her article, Is Female to Male as Nature is to Culture? Now, looking back at the beginning of history, or perhaps the beginning of creation, most would think of the Judeo-Christian tale of Adam and Eve, supposedly the first man and woman created by God in Genesis 2 of the Hebrew Bible. Now, the name Adam, the first man, comes from the feminine Hebrew word Adama, which means ground, land, or soil. Now, there's a lot of controversy surrounding the idea that woman was created second and from Adam's rib. But wouldn't the etymology of Adam suggest that he came from woman if the soil itself is of feminine origin? Now, this would be the only logical conclusion for the complexity of the tale of Adam and Eve, as it seems to contradict the fundamentals of woman's reproductive systems. But in fact, underneath the surface of Adam's creation lies the theological idea or Gnostic theological idea that before God's creation, Sophia, or wisdom, was with the omnipotent deity. This could be interpreted in two ways. Either A, wisdom is merely personified as feminine, or B, Sophia/God's wisdom was God's omnipotent wife. But if one were to take the latter, then wouldn't this mean that the ground Adam was formed from was created by Sophia? Both interpretations, however, indicate that without Sophia, there would be no elements for Adam to be formed from. Therefore, the ground gives birth to the first man. And my thesis surrounds the argument that through bell hooks touching the earth, artificial creation in nature is not explicitly inherent in the male species, as it would be alluded to in Henry David Thoreau's The Maine Woods and Ralph Waldo Emerson's work From Nature, whereas the connection between human existence and nature is linked through the divine enlightenment of Sophia/God's wisdom. Now, to understand the dichotomy between nature and culture, one must understand that to understand culture is to understand its functions within the natural world. According to Ortner, every culture, generically culture, is engaged in the process of generating and sustaining symbols of meaningful forms, by means of which humanity transcends the givens of natural existence, bends them to its purposes, controls them in its interest. And in this sense, we can look at the works of Ralph Waldo Emerson. He is a leader of the Transcendentalist philosophical movement of the mid-19th century, and he writes, "Nature, in the common sense, refers to essences unchanged by man. Art is supplied to the mixture of his will with the same things as in a house, a canal, a statue, a picture. But his operations taken together are so insignificant, a little chipping, baking, patching, and washing, that in an impression so grand as that of the world on the human mind, they do not vary the result." Now, it is clear that Emerson illustrates exactly what culture intends to inflict on nature and how it attempts to culturalize it. And culturalize is a term used by Ortner. This culturalization of nature is explained to be the opposite of woman, who creates naturally from her own being, while men are free to or forced to create artificially. That is, through cultural means and in such a way as to sustain culture. In addition, we have Ralph Waldo Emerson saying here, "Nature never wears a mean appearance. Neither does the wisest man extort her secret and lose his curiosity by finding out all her perfection. Nature never became a toy to a wise spirit. The flowers, the animals, the mountains reflected the wisdom of his best hour, as much as they had delighted the simplicity of his childhood." Now, this is interesting because the words wise and wisdom are repeated throughout this quote of Emerson's, and they seem to convey that the female gendered nature serves as a source of wisdom for Emerson. And for Thoreau, here's a picture of Thoreau, it serves as this higher knowledge, more definite than a novel in grand surprise on a sudden revelation of the insufficiency of all that we called knowledge before. And this is found in The Maine Woods on page 201. And Thoreau conveys nature in a sense that he explains in Through the Maine Woods. Nature has got him at a disadvantage, caught him alone, and pilfers him of some of his divine faculty. She does not smile on him as in the plains. She seems to say sternly, "Why came ye here before your time? The ground is not prepared for you. Is it not enough that I smile in the valleys? I've never made this soil for thy feet, this air for thy breathing, these rocks for thy neighbors. I cannot pity nor fondle thee here, but forever relentlessly drive thee hence to where I am kind. Why seek me when I have not called thee, and then complain because you find me but a stepmother? Shouldest thou freeze or starve, or shudder thy life away? Here is no shrine, nor altar, nor any access to my ear." Now, his perspective aligns with much of Emerson's transcendental attitudes, a life that is fulfilled through minimalism without the bonds of these contemporary or modern inventions. It is the depiction of nature here that is robbing man of his own anthropocentric beliefs that leaves such a cold impression of what is supposed to be a nurturing mother or Mother Nature. And according to Ortner, woman in nature is being identified with, woman is being identified with, or if you will, seems to be a symbol of something that every culture devalues, such as man. Man is identified with culture. And she goes on to say that something that every culture defines as being at a lower order of existence than itself. So my question is, could Thoreau and Emerson alike have explored the implication of Sophia/God's wisdom as having as almighty creator of nature instead of God himself? Now, while the two have openly rejected organized religion, their writing proves otherwise, especially through Thoreau's fascination with mythology. And now, to get to bell hooks' touching the earth, I want to redefine this gender-nature dichotomy that Sherry Ortner talks about. Bell Hooks is a marginalized woman, and yet she fills this gap between that dichotomy of nature and culture. For Hooks, this ancestral culture of working the land through bodily, physical exertion is what connected her and to her ancestors to the American South. She claims that through both people of color and Native Americans, they shared with one another a respect for the life-giving forces of nature. In other words, nature is perceived as mother, even if the cultivation of crops for food, for flowers and the like, are for aesthetic purposes. It meant that women like Hooks could have a spiritual connection with the nature around them. These life-giving forces merely extended nature's generosity to Hooks and her ancestors as an act of kindness in return for their reverence to her. In fact, these actions only shed a light on the flaws within the notion of the male sex associated with culture in Ortner's essay regarding physical labor, working the land, colonizing the land, destroying those life-giving forces that man is associated with. Women have come far to be included in contemporary culture to where nature can not only suffer the effects of history's invasive efforts to destroy, build, use, and deplete of nature's resources, but to be tended, cared for, and reverenced in a way that highlights the omnipotence of nature's authority over the human species. giving one's knowledge through spirituality and physical labor among its land. And this ties into the story of Adam and Eve, in which Hooks understands that this soil that Adam was created from, that she loved so much as a child, was a source of life. Through nature, gives one wisdom, knowledge, and the birth of new life, just like Sophia, God's wisdom. And through the feminine, culture recognizes that woman is an active participant in its special process, but sees her as being at the same time more rooted in or having more direct connection with nature, as Ortner suggests. And so, my conclusion is that bell hooks neither defines the dichotomy that male is associated with culture or that woman is explicitly associated with nature. It is through this middle ground that bell hooks works the earth just like man has cultivated the earth and has established culture. It is bell hooks that tends and cares for the earth in her own way and through her own femininity, in which she breaks this dichotomy. She is ultimately a part of the earth in which the earth is feminine in itself. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and these are my works cited.